Jersey has been a sphinx for me. It's been my like New Hampshire, Jersey, and the differences within Southern dialects and accents, especially,
Mhm.
have been things that I thought I was going to nail, but I keep getting flummoxed. So with New Jersey, if you were to talk to somebody, give them a starter kit for thinking about the Jersey accent in particular, because again, the dialect takes care of itself if the
Sure.
author has written it. But in terms of the accent, how does one begin to approach it? Because I have such a hard time, and I have such a hard time finding examples on YouTube or even the International Dialects of English Archive.
Right.
It's very slippery to me. How does one begin?
Yeah, so I would say the first question is, where in New Jersey are you?
Okay.
Because that's going to make a big difference because we were talking about transitional zones. Jersey is very much a traditional zone in the sense that North Jersey is not going to speak the same as South Jersey. And even within North Jersey, if you're in Bergen County or Hudson County, chances are it's going to be different from, let's say, I don't know, what's further west, wherever, like Sussex County, which is by like the northwestern tip, because they're all very different. They have different influences based on the supra-regional dialects, let's say.
Hmm.
So that's the starting point. I think that's part of the reason why it's been maybe a little bit elusive to you or for you, because so where I grew up in northern New Jersey, just 10 minutes from the George Washington Bridge, it's basically an extension of New York City.
Mm.
Traditionally, the oldest, maybe Anglo, whatever, however you want to classify those older generations, almost virtually identical with what we would say as a standard or typical New York City accent, right? Bergen County,
Hmm.
Hudson County, Union County, probably too. Um, and then you can get very, very nitty gritty because so Bilibov, one of the founders of modern traditional variation of sociolinguistics, he and many others have worked on atlases of North American dialects where they've really tried their best to get all of the nuances. And it's not perfect, but it's fairly well documented, the New York City area at least. And what they show is that in New Jersey, in northern New Jersey, east of the Hackensack River, they are engaging in a lot more of the same sorts of sound processes. So, as I mentioned, I was born in Rhode Island, and whereas Rhode Island has certain things in common with New York City, they have that the nasal tension of the vowels. So, like I am or man,
I
but New
am.
York's yeah. Well, and then Cranston is the
Right.
shibboleth we would call it Cranston, right?
Uh,
But other than that, they don't really do they don't say bad or sad or well,
right.
right. That's
Right.
that's isolated to other dialectal regions of the U.S. But the nasal one, they have that. But in New York, depending on your dialect and socioeconomic status and all of that, you might say bad, but you wouldn't say man. You'd say the man, right? The man, or manners, right? Or the manager.
Hmm.
Let me speak to the manager. And as I move there, and even though I have certain features that are still Rhode Island, that's something, that pattern of that nasal tension is something that I picked up on from New York City. So I would say the manager or and so on. But that is only from the counties that are the cities in the counties east of the Hackensack River. So
Okay.
you have a tiny sliver of maybe three or so counties because it's closer proximity to New York. But then maybe even just two towns over, you'll start saying, for example, there's a town called Paramus, but if you're maybe two towns west of Paramus, you'll say Paramus.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's a very subtle difference whether or not that nasal is influencing that vowel to be tensed and raised.
Now,
Um,
how about West Jersey in contrast?
yeah, so this is the thing, right? So the two main regions are really North Jersey and South Jersey.
Oh, North Jersey.
Right?
Okay. Okay. That's good to know.
So those are the two, right? So, and especially Northeast and Southwest, because Northeast is New York City, and then
Right.
Southwest is Philadelphia.
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah.
and if we think of Philly as sort of like the center of that dialect region, like the city of Philly, well, Camden is just across, the river. And so basically all of the Cherry Hill, which is an affluent city, still basically is an extension of the Philadelphia accent region, and so on and so forth. It's really the trickiest parts when you're in the Northwest and the Southeast, because those are further away from the major dialectal zones. So there's different theories of language change. Some people talk about a wave theory model, which it's basically like ripples of how far away are you from the major dialectal center. So if you think of throwing a pebble in a lake, I'm not good at skipping stones, but if you are, then like there's more and more. The further out you go, the farther away the ripples are. So you're not going to be as close to where that stone hits the water.
Okay.
It's the same idea with how many features of that dialect are you going to have, right? And so that's where we sort of, part of the reason why we see so much dialectal variation within New Jersey. So whereas O fronting doesn't really happen in North Jersey, so I would say home. Once you go to South Jersey, it's home.
Okay. Yeah. Which is yeah. I mean that's the thing that really threw me with both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is that sound.
Oh, well, I lived in Pittsburgh for 5 years because that's where I did my PhD. And it's crazy how I guess Pennsylvania is a pretty large state in comparison to New Jersey, but from one side to another. But even in Philadelphia, they have certain things more in common with New York and New Jersey, right? So, for example, there's lots of vowel mergers that happen throughout the states, right? Like the caught merger,
Right.
So Philly doesn't have that merger, or at least traditionally doesn't. Maybe the youngest speakers are starting to merge, but New York doesn't, right? So I would say I slept on a cot and I caught the ball, right? And of course, New York has that awe raising. So it's the dog, right? The coffee talk, right? That's a stereotype.
Yeah, sure.
But we definitely have that distinction in almost the entirety of New Jersey, unless you're younger, then you maybe don't do that as strongly, right? It may be still a separate vowel, or they may be two separate vowels, but not quite as distinct. That aw may not be quite as raised. But in Pittsburgh, that merger is complete, although it's in a different direction. So they'll say aw for everything, whereas the majority of the general US is ah for everything, right? Caught, but they tend to say aw, caught. So even one state, like I know this is about New Jersey, but now we start talking about Pennsylvania, but that's the idea, is that you can't talk about these in isolation because they're all really dependent on each other. They all are in relation to each other. That was a very artful, very rhotic other that I just said. And I tend not to speak so rhotically, but anyway, but in other things, right? So New Jersey, you tend to have this, you don't have this merger of the AR, ER merger, right? So I would say Mary as a woman's name, but Merry as in Merry Christmas, and marry as the verb, they got married, right? Those three are separate vowels for me, but much of the states have started to merge them all to probably air, Mary, Mary, Mary. And then some will maybe merge two of them and so on and so forth. So I'll say very American, whereas most people in different parts of the country will say very American and so on and so forth. So Philly, again, these are the older generations. I'm in my 30s. I have nieces and nephews that are 10 and under, and they've started to speak differently, right? I don't know if it's their teachers or shifts in their social groupings. There's all kinds of factors that play a role in that too. But then my nieces and nephews are all under 10. They'll say mine, the I. That's very that New York I. Yeah. So well, why isn't that changing, right? So these are some of the questions that sociolinguists try to figure out. Well, why do certain linguistic variables or specific sounds, let's say, why are they changing and why are others not? Why are certain things becoming more standard-like and why are other things kind of going in the opposite direction? And there's different reasons for it. There's different motivations for why maybe younger people are going to do things differently, or maybe younger men are going to do things differently. And in fact, earlier you were mentioning when characterizing, a white feminine voice, the high-rising terminals, or uptalk as it's sometimes called.
Okay.
Lots of young men do that too, actually. So what may start as, something that a certain group of people start doing can spread for all kinds of reasons, because it no longer becomes associated with maybe gender, but then maybe age.